This is an absolute, I repeat, absolute turning point, and it will push so much capital into the Bitcoin market. This event that has just happened, and I'm not even talking about the event where the US will start printing money, because the US now wants to lower its capital requirements for banks, and that will trigger a capital flight into Bitcoin. But that's not even the event I'm talking about. We'll take a look in a moment at exactly what I mean. Of course, we'll also look at the changes with the banks, the so-called enhanced supplementary leverage ratios. I've talked about that from time to time as well. Scott Besson also said that this would happen. Now he's confirming it. Bloomberg, it's insane. We also need to talk about Russia. I accidentally forgot to mention that in the last video, I had announced that I would talk about it. Then I forgot. Russia is making a massive move here, and we have Arthur Hayes, who is talking about a huge price target for this year that we need to take a look at. But first, smash the like button down below so Bitcoin can go to the moon. So Bitcoin can really break out. I'll show it to you again here because it's just so awesome. One TV, and then just a meter away, another TV. The absurdity we're living in right now, you know? Sell your TVs and buy Bitcoin with the money. Of course, this is not a financial app, not investment advice. But why do people have two TVs side by side when they could just buy Bitcoin instead? That kind of logic is just beyond me, and especially on just 1 square meter. So here we have the biggest financial opportunity, and people are out here buying TVs so they can have 2 TVs in a 1 square meter room. That's what Bitcoin teaches, low time preference. Yes, you can consume, yes, you can buy things, but buy them consciously, not just mindlessly. And everything else, you can just throw into Bitcoin. In 10 years, you'll probably be glad you didn't buy that second TV, but instead bought Bitcoin, which will massively outperform the TV. Let's take a look at this. A new law here in Ohio has been passed. Bitcoin capital gains tax exemption for all purchases under $200. The first state in America, a turning point. But this isn't the turning point I'm talking about yet, but it does lead up to what we're about to get to, the turning point we're about to reach here. But first, let's briefly talk about Russia. We can see here, the chairman of the Russian Finance Committee says that 1 trillion, these are probably, rubles. 1 trillion Russian rubles are being used in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for foreign trade. The next global reserve asset will be Bitcoin. Very, very bullish. And that's also what I've reported on in the past. Yes, when there's geopolitical uncertainty, when Russia's assets are frozen, when Russia is censored or sanctioned. I mean, what are they supposed to do? They really have no other option but to turn to Bitcoin, to use Bitcoin, to basically start trading with Bitcoin now if they're being put in a tight spot like this. And that's what a lot of people need to understand. Embargoes, sanctions, and so on. In the past, they work to some extent. But if you do that nowadays, you just push people to buy Bitcoin. I also spoke to someone before, and we talked about football clubs, and the person I'm talking about will know, if he's watching here now, that I'm talking about him. It was simply about soccer clubs. I still owe him a reply, but I actually wanted to send him my answer back. That it's just the way it is, that you can really only understand Bitcoin. Because he said that a lot of soccer clubs just aren't aware of it. And PSG is the first soccer club that's actually paying attention to it, that maybe wants to start pursuing a Bitcoin strategy. But most clubs still aren't aware of it. And if everything is working reasonably well, your business model is working pretty well, everything is running smoothly, you're not being sanctioned and so on, then there's no reason to change anything. But Russia actually has a reason to change something here. They were sanctioned, they were censored. For example, Eric Trump, also a good example. The Trump family was censored, sanctioned, excluded from banks. Now Trump is going all in on Bitcoin. The whole Trump family are now the ultimate Bitcoin bulls. And that's how it often is. You only develop a need to know when something happens. So you need a certain amount of pain, just like you only go to the doctor when you can't walk anymore, when your foot hurts. I mean, smart people can sense it ahead of time, when something might be going wrong or something like that. But there are a lot of people who are just stuck in a Bratwurst coma. They don't realize that something's going wrong here. They only notice when, for example, the symptoms show up because they're about to collapse. That means when you're about to collapse or on the verge of, I don't know, end-stage kidney damage or something, or right before cirrhosis of the liver, then you might realize, okay, maybe I should stop drinking alcohol now. Of course, this isn't meant as an attack on anyone who is going through things like this. I know that sometimes it's not so easy to recognize something like that. And when you're actually in that situation, of course, things look different. But just to explain here why a lot of people still don't get it, it's simply because many people don't feel the need for Bitcoin yet, since everything is still going way too well. By the way, this also explains why adoption is sometimes higher in countries with hyperinflation than in first world countries. Because for those people, Bitcoin isn't just an option, it's basically a lifeline. Now let's take a look at the first turning point I'm talking about here. Later, we'll also get into the whole banking story. And just in, Thailand has approved a crypto tax exemption until 2029. So no crypto taxes here until 2000. And we just recently saw tax relief in the US. But this is a complete crypto exemption. Feel free to let me know in the comments below, especially if you're in Thailand, how exactly this is affecting things and so on. Because in my opinion, this is a huge deal, and it might even happen in the US as well. There are already discussions about it over there. Donald Trump says he wants to turn the US into a crypto stronghold. In my opinion, you can't really have a crypto stronghold as long as there are still taxes on crypto, on Bitcoin here. And if we get rid of taxes here, then Bitcoin can actually be used as money, because then you can make completely normal transactions. If you have a capital gains tax, it's always difficult to buy something from a merchant with Bitcoin, since, in theory, you'd have to sell Bitcoin with every payment and then taxes would be due. That's obviously really, really strange. And of course, you want to avoid that. That's why this is an event that could trigger a chain reaction here. Now Thailand is starting. El Salvador has already done it, and other countries will follow. I think here in Paraguay, where I am right now, there's also no tax on crypto. There was also this quick news going around that Paraguay was making Bitcoin legal tender, but that turned out to be fake because the president's account was hacked. But now the first countries are starting. Other countries will follow. And in my opinion, this will trigger ripple effects. So yeah, domino effects. One domino after another. And they can pull unlimited capital into the market. And now we have the second very exciting story here. The US is on the verge of printing massive amounts of money. And here, we can see it directly from Bloomberg. And I'll translate here for you what Bloomberg wrote. And you shouldn't underestimate what they're writing here. The US is planning to ease capital regulations that restrict banks' trading of government bonds. And now, here's the summary. US bank regulators are planning to lower the enhanced supplementary leverage ratio, or ESLR, by up to 1.5 percentage points for the largest lenders, which could reduce their capital requirements. The proposal would change the overall ratio instead of excluding specific assets, like government bonds. However, there could be a public consultation on whether government bonds should be excluded from the calculation. The revision is intended to strengthen the role of banks as intermediaries in the market. But some experts warn that loosening the leverage ratio may not provide enough incentive to buy more government bonds, and could risk making the financial system even more fragile. That means you inevitably have to find buyers for government bonds, and now they want to push banks to hold more government bonds. The goal is to get the bond chaos under control to some extent. They're now trying to find ways to stabilize the bond market, basically, without resorting to direct QE. This is basically a kind of backdoor QE. QE might not even be the right term here. That's why I call it backdoor QE, because if you just come out and say, we're doing QE now, then it probably wouldn't necessarily cause distortions, but it would definitely trigger panic, since the markets would shoot up and so on. Of course, this will also calm the bond markets, but you always have to find new ways to do the same thing. Just call it something different, so people don't realize, okay, here comes exactly the same thing again. People then think, okay, now something completely different is coming, but in reality, it's exactly the same thing, just wrapped up differently. And to maybe explain that a bit better, here's a clearer explanation. This means that banks have to hold less equity capital in order to trade US government bonds, treasuries. And the goal is for banks to be able to buy more treasuries, which artificially boosts demand for US debt. And that's why the comparison to QE isn't so far off, because it simply creates artificial demand here. Not the free market buying, but rather demand is being artificially generated. And now there's a bombshell assessment from Arthur Hayes on this. Let's listen in briefly to hear why he believes that the price of Bitcoin will explode and skyrocket this year because of this. He's already announced that this is going to happen. Here, the enhanced supplementary leverage ratio is being changed.
By end of the year. Is that still your timeline? Are you happy?
Yeah, so I think that we get to 250,000 by the end of the year. It would be bumpy along the way, obviously, but that's sort of my end of year part started. And then $1 million Bitcoin, as I guess got off stage talking about how they're going to print, I think, in the realm of $9 trillion-ish between now and that period of time. And that is, Fannie and Freddie, the government support entities that are allowed to create mortgages in the US, they will print $5 trillion. You will have probably up to $1 trillion purchased by the banking system. You do supplemental leverage ratio exemptions and purchasing things that the foreigners are selling. And I think the banks are going to because they now don't have to hold as equity capital against their treasury book. They can lend more into the real American economy.
And Arthur Hayes says that this event happening now with the supplementary leverage ratios will cause Bitcoin to shoot up to 250,000 this year. He also says here that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are going to print $9 trillion to basically buy bonds. And what's probably meant by that is that the Treasury is more or less buying back the bonds, not the central bank. So we have the two major factors, Treasury buybacks and supplementary leverage ratios. That would take us to a Bitcoin price of 250,000 US dollars. And I mean, these are some pretty intense things happening here. and most people don't even really notice what's going on in the background. So, we always have to look at what's happening on the liquidity side. If we see such massive expansions, then of course, we might need to adjust our case accordingly. That doesn't mean 100% that it will actually happen with the supplementary leverage ratio or with the buybacks that Reyes is talking about here, but I'd say there's definitely a certain probability scenario in play. And as I said, Scott Bessent has already hinted that Treasury buybacks are within the realm of possibility, changes to the supplementary ratio are within the realm of possibility, and Scott Bessent is the finance minister. Maybe, when he says something, you should open your ears and really listen closely. Of course, we don't know anything for sure. It could also be that it won't happen until next year. Arthur Hayes also said that the peak of the cycle won't come this year, but rather next year, because the liquidity will continue to flow into next year. Feel free to let me know in the comments below what you think about that statement, whether you agree with it or if you think it's over the top. Yeah, let me know down in the comments, guys. See you guys. Until then. Oh, and I almost forgot. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, if you want to get ready for the big print, because that's what Larry Leopard always says, the big print is coming. I'll drop a link for you to 21 Bitcoin. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can easily, safely, and simply save up to 20% on fees when buying Bitcoin. Highly recommended. It's the easiest way to buy Bitcoin here in Europe. See you guys. Until then, peace out.